This is Talk to Seattle, and I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode, I have Ari Hoffman, who is running for Seattle City Council in the 2nd District. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself, maybe your background and experience?
Sure. I'm a citizen who just had enough of what's going on in Seattle. About a year ago, I was contacted because I'm on the board of some Jewish cemeteries in Seattle, and they were having some problems because some RVs moved in next door, and they started dealing drugs out of the cemeteries. And they started running prostitution out of the cemeteries, and it caused about $300,000 worth of damage to the cemeteries. We were finding needles everywhere. Groundskeepers were getting stuck with needles. They were even being assaulted by people who were in the cemeteries at night. And people didn't want to visit the graves anymore. And these cemeteries, the name for them is Bikur Cholim, which means helping the sick. We were using this money to help people in our community because the cemeteries are fundraisers for the Jewish community. And now we were stuck paying for this problem, and we couldn't help the people that we helped anymore. Interestingly enough, there were even people at the cemeteries who we had been dealing with for years who were having problems of living on the street and such. And we were trying to help them out, and we gave them jobs mowing lawns and things of that nature, but they got pushed out by this new element that came in, and we weren't even able to help them anymore. So when that happened, I said there's got to be a better route for everything that's going on in Seattle, and I started trying to contact my elected officials. They weren't interested in listening to us. Some of them even refused to meet with us. Some of them scheduled to meet with us and then didn't show up and sent staff instead. And I said, Seattle deserves better. There were so many other things going on at that time, the head tax and a whole bunch of other insanity that the Seattle City Council was doing. I said, there's got to be a better way. And then friends of mine said, hey, you're so involved in this kind of stuff, maybe you should consider a run for office. And what was interesting was the people who were saying that were people from all sides of the political spectrum. And I think that the average citizen in Seattle has just had enough and is looking for a change in leadership, somebody who's accountable to them, somebody who's going to look out for how their money is spent, somebody who's going to look out for their safety, somebody who's going to help the people on the streets and get back on their feet and help them with addiction treatment and with mental health treatment and find a way out of this crisis that we're having right now, which is more of a drug crisis and a mental health crisis than it is with a housing crisis.
And what made you want to run for office instead of maybe doing this kind of activity in more of a private sense?
I tried to do it in a private sense. I tried to meet with the elected officials. I tried testifying before city council. I tried, and they weren't interested in listening. And there's an idea, it's a concept in Judaism. The Hebrew is in ish sarich lishdel lihiyot ish, which means if there's nobody else to do it, you got to step up and do it. And a lot of people were interested in me doing it, so that's exactly what I did. I went and met some of the other candidates, and I took my wife with me because she's got a good radar for these things. And actually, she met one of them, and she said, if this is who's running, then you got to run. And until that point, she actually wasn't on board. But the whole thing was I wanted to make sure to find somebody that I could invest in, and I just couldn't find them. So I decided to try it myself. I don't want to be the guy who's complaining online. I want to be the guy who actually tried to get something done. If that doesn't work out, I can complain online. But why do that when you argue on Facebook, people just get upset? Instead, you could try and make your community a better place, and that's what public service really should be. Public service should be somebody trying to make a difference, trying to make things better, trying to make little changes, and then going back to work, which is exactly what I want to do. I don't have political ambition.
And could you tell me a little bit about your district?
Sure. District 2 is one of the most diverse districts in the city, if not the most diverse district. 98118 is one of the most diverse zip codes in the entire country. It spans from the city limits down near Rainier Beach all the way up to parts of Pioneer Square and the International District in Chinatown, and it goes from the water to the water. So it goes from Lake Washington to the Duwamish.
And what are some of the biggest problems facing your district?
Everything that's happening in Seattle is happening in a different part of District 2. So in Georgetown, you have the issue with the RVs are everywhere. And my office is in Georgetown, so I deal with it all the time. And the RVs are running prostitutes out of them. They're dealing drugs out of them. Business owners will come in the morning and not know if their store is still in good shape from the night before. I've heard horror stories of guys tearing out electrical panels and stealing vehicles. I've had it happen to me before. Bullets have come through the windows of my office. Georgetown is a war zone at night. It's like a third world country. It's like a zombie apocalypse. People down here are on drugs, and it's affecting their mental acuity, and they're stealing, and it's a nightmare. And there's people who live in Georgetown, and people forget about it. Then you go over to Rainier Beach. I saw a letter from some residents of Rainier Beach. They have worked so hard to make that community a great, beautiful, wonderful place. And they wrote a letter to the mayor's office and to city council saying, we don't want Rainier Beach to turn into Ballard. Now think about that for a second. Ballard we think of as the nice place, but now Ballard's gotten so run down from all the crime and activity that's over there that the residents of Rainier Beach don't want Rainier Beach to turn into Ballard. That's saying a whole lot. They're having the same issues with the RVs coming down and bringing all the crime with them and bringing all the drug issues with them. They're finding needles in all their parks. We were having issues with some of the parks in my neighborhood where you're finding needles, like in Genesee Meadows, you're starting to find tents. Somebody nearby Genesee Meadows was telling me that somebody broke into their house, this was actually covered on Q13, and was living in their house while they were at work during the day because they thought they had left town, so they decided to move in. People are having these kind of issues all across the city. And I think that's the biggest issue. And when I go door knocking, people tell me they want a solution to the homeless problem. They want a solution to the drug problem. All the other issues they have come way down after that. That's the first thing they say. Are you going to solve the homeless problem? Are you going to solve the drug problem? That's what they say across the board. Education and all the other things that we normally talk about in the election cycle, they usually don't even mention those. This is foremost on their minds. They're concerned about their safety. They're concerned about the people on the streets, and they want it solved.
And what do you think are the biggest issues facing the city as a whole?
I think that's the same issue that's facing the entire city. I think fiscal accountability, where's all the money going that's supposed to be fixing this problem? And safety is a huge issue. Our police department is operating at 60% of capacity of what it should be, and we don't have enough police officers. We don't have enough money being funded into the services we need, and who knows where it's going. I would love to see an audit of the city spending and find out where all of it's going, because it's not getting to where it needs to go.
And what can the city do to help homeless folks?
So you have to break down the homeless crisis into what it actually is. You have different facets of it. It's not a one-size-fits-all. There's no silver bullet for it. You have to treat the opioid and drug addiction issues. People need treatment. You can't just leave them on the streets. You can't say, go to this place and get injected and we'll just watch and make sure you're okay, because you're poisoning yourself over time. We need to make sure that people have treatment options, real treatment options. In the Seattle City Charter, it says that sanitariums are part of the city responsibility. So the fact that Western State Hospital lost its accreditation and lost its funding because it was so underperforming and because it had so many problems, that is a failure on everybody's part. And we need to make sure we have the best mental health treatment available. We also need affordable housing options. We need to make sure that people can afford to live in the city, and that works for everybody. My property taxes have gone up. They've almost tripled in the 15 years that I've lived here. And so many people tell me they just can't afford to live here anymore because the cost of living is so high, yet nobody's addressing the fact that the city coffers are full, and yet more and more taxes are coming all the time. They're just dumping more and more and more on us, and people can't afford to live here anymore. So now you have a housing affordable crisis where when you get somebody back on their feet, where are you going to put them? What are you going to do with them? We need solutions for where people are going to live. But the first thing we need to do is we need to triage the whole situation. You can't have people living on the street while you're figuring this out and building resources. What you can do is you can bring in trailers, which I have seen, which have in them bunks, which have bathrooms, which have showers. You can bring these trailers and you could set them up somewhere like Terminal 5, Harbor Island, somewhere like that. Make sure you have services on site so you can get people off the streets. So they're not dying on the streets anymore, so they're not freezing in snowstorms, and get them the help they need and get them triaged and get them what they need. The people who have mental issues, get them to mental health treatment. The people who have substance abuse issues, get them to the treatment centers for that, get them addiction treatment, get them into recovery. And the people who are having financial situations, how can we work with organizations like Millionaires Club that hire people and help them out of homelessness? How can we work with organizations that perform and find them jobs to make sure that they can come back to society and be part of society and be able to afford to live in a city like this?
Another big issue on the minds of a lot of voters is our transportation system. What can the city do to improve our transportation?
Right now we have a big problem where when they built the light rail, they didn't really think about how to get people to the light rail. So right now I know that I would love to use the light rail, but there's no parking lots at the light rail. There's not enough parking. If you want people out of their cars, you have to do what other cities do, where they have tons of parking at train stations so that people can drive from their house and then leave their vehicle for the day, go to work, and come back the exact same way. That will reduce congestion immensely, because if people have an easy option where they don't have to find parking in the city, they'll take it. They'll do it. But right now it's too difficult. I know that if I was going to try and commute to my work, it would probably take me about 45 minutes to an hour, but it's an 8-minute drive. Plus, you also have to take into account that not everybody can take mass transit. There are moms that need to take their cars to work with them in case something happens with their kid at school during the day. There are parents that drive carpool. There are people who do deliveries. There are people who need their vehicles for work. You can't get people out of their cars, but if you can can get the people who don't need to be driving into the city, and you have options for them where they can leave their car somewhere and take mass transit, that's great. If you can expand your mass transit options, that's fantastic too. But the question is, where's all the accountability with regards to mass transit? We're talking about tearing up streets and routing issues that are causing issues we're talking about routing options that are causing issues for business owners, and we need to solve those. We're having issues with congestion downtown. We're having issues where the bike lanes are affecting traffic, and only 2.5% of people, or commuters rather, are actually using them to commute to the city. We need to use a more logical and a more practical and accountable system for this. For example, if you look at when they were talking about the streetcar, how they ordered these cars that are too heavy for the tracks, now they have to tear up an entire street and then reinforce it so that these cars can fit the tracks. Why didn't they just sell those trains to another city, buy ones of the correct size? That would have made more sense. Why didn't they adjust the design? Why didn't they do their math right in the first place? We want more transportation options, but they're spending money like it's going out of style, and we need to make sure that they're accountable for where that money's going and have real practical solutions, especially with regards to the routing, so that they're not making things worse. In my neighborhood, the bike lanes that they're installing are about to make the neighborhood more dangerous for pedestrians, and a lot of people like myself that are Sabbath-observant Jews. So now walking across the street is going to become a bigger problem because they've filtered a whole bunch of traffic from Rainier Avenue over onto Wilson Avenue, but also they've gotten rid of the parking on one side of the street for these bike lanes, and that's where all the houses are. So now you have kids for carpool and such who are going to be dropped off on one side of the street have to dodge across a major street because now all of that traffic's coming over to get to their houses. It's only going to make things less safe for people. So this isn't being done from a logical, practical standpoint, and there's no accountability for the spending.
And what can the city do to help improve housing affordability?
Well, the first thing they can do is stop taxing us into oblivion. Every time they say they're renewing a levy, they're not actually renewing a levy. What they're doing is they're renewing a levy at a new, higher assessed value. So you're getting assessed higher and higher each time you do that. And landlords aren't just going to eat it. What happens is they roll that over onto the tenant. So now the tenant's rent rates are going up, and people don't realize. They think they're taxing the landlords. No, it's taxing their own rent. So let's start by addressing that. Where's all this money going that we keep taxing ourselves with? And we keep voting for it. So this is as much our fault as it is anybody else's. But then the other thing is, with regards to housing affordability, there's not enough supply. In the 1930s and 40s, when Boeing came to town, we didn't have a massive housing shortage because they were able to build what they needed to build. Here, it can take up to 3 years to get a permit for a single-family house. I got one right now that I'm working on. And because you have this issue with the zoning department and with the codes that are so restrictive, you can't build what you need to build to get out of this. It's taking too long, so you have a supply and demand issue. And that's why the housing prices are going up so high, because there's just not enough places to go. You need to figure out a way to reform the zoning code, to reform the codes of construction, and figure out a way to make them practical so people can build, and they can build more. The other thing you need to do is you need to upzone the areas near mass transit. That'll solve your congestion problem, but also it won't impact neighborhoods. So in District 2, the people who know District 2 know that Martin Luther King Way, along that corridor as you're going towards I-5, there's a whole bunch of broken down shops there and other properties. You could upzone that area, build high-rises there, taller buildings, not affect surrounding neighborhoods, have people who are living near mass transit who will use it to commute, and have more affordable housing because you have a bigger supply of housing.
We live in very polarized times. How would you, as a city leader, work to bring people together?
I've already started to do that. There's people who come after me on Twitter and Facebook all the time. And what I try to do is reach out to them before anything else. And I've had coffee with people who completely disagree with me just because I want to make sure that I am representing them as well as the people who do agree with me. Because the goal is to be a representative for all of District 2, not just the people who agree with me. One of the biggest issues I found was that my city officials were not interested in talking to me. And a lot of people have said the exact same thing. That's why when I go doorbelling, I'm not handing them the brochure. I'm handing them my business card. It's got my phone number and my email address on it, so they know I'm on the other end. And I spend my time talking to people, whether they agree with me, whether they disagree with me, and we have those hard conversations. I've been yelled at, I've been cussed at, I've had anti-Semitic things thrown at me, But I have the conversations, and that's the first step. That's the most important part. But also, can you find a way, a middle ground where you compromise? And usually, when you sit down with somebody and they can see that you're an average person, that you're a normal person, and that you just want to have the conversation, you can usually find a middle ground to compromise on. And that's the most important thing. We find something that we agree on, and that's somewhere to build out of, and now we trust each other. That's my method. That's my goal.
And if people want to learn more about your campaign, where should they go?
So you can go to HoffmanForSeattle.com. That's Hoffman, FOR, Seattle.com, and it's all right there. And if they want to interact with me on my Facebook page, Ari Hoffman for Seattle City Council, you can interact with me there, and you'll be able to have a conversation with me there. You can PM the campaign, and we can go back and forth on the issues or set up a time to meet for coffee.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
You've been listening to Talk to Seattle, and I've been your host, Jason Rigden. If you want to support the show, why not follow us on social media? We are at Talk to Seattle on both Twitter and Instagram. Thank you so much for listening.